So this is the tank before embarking on the new scaping project. Pretty tired looking, like someone has totally given up on it, which in fairness I kinda had. I had been planning this new scape for a while and had concentrated my energy on the basement fish tanks in order to find new homes for all the fish in this tank. And as you've seen in my previous videos, my netting skills are atrocious. So by the time I got most of the fish out of here, everything was pretty badly destroyed. Now here is just a quick panning shot of the rocks that I'll be using in this scape. I'll talk about them in a bit more detail when I get on with the scaping, but essentially they're a mix of millennium stone and limestone. Now with this tank, the background has been the thing that got me excited. Like I said before, I want it to be a low maintenance feature tank that will be in the main home environment. It needs to look beautiful but not constantly faffed with. I purchased this background from Aqua Maniac, and they do a line of 1 cm thin 3D backgrounds that in my opinion look awesome. They will also do custom sizes, which is what I had to do since this dual record tank hasn't been in production for well over a decade. A word of caution on custom orders, the finish looks a lot darker when it has just been produced. I was initially disappointed with this background, thinking that it was too dark. I contacted Aqua Maniac and they explained that once I immersed the background and waited a few weeks it would lighten up. If I still wasn't happy, they were fine with me returning the product for a refund. They explained that a lot of their pre-made stock was produced a few months prior to even being shipped. Anyway, they were spot on. This background has lightened up significantly and already looks much better than the sample that I ordered. Anyway, enough about the background. What you just saw was me cutting some black pipe. This is for a cave system that I plan on installing beneath the sand of the rocks. It's really simple, just a right angle connector and 2 pieces of pipe cut to size. Ultimately you won't see any of this and it will give my pleco a place to hide once he is joined by the Mbuna. So here I am getting started with dismantling the tank. First I removed all the plants and bogwood and started draining the water. I drained the load of the tank water into a bucket, and then whilst the rest of the tank was draining into the garden, I set about catching all of the fish. Once the fish were all safely in the bucket, it was time to get scaping. Now, my vision for this tank was 2 clusters of rock, one large on the left, stretching over 2/3 of the tank, and then one much smaller cluster on the right-hand side that looks as though it could be the beginning of another cluster escaping beyond the glass. Here I am installing the background. I did have to trim it slightly at the top. That's one consideration of when you buy backgrounds like this, is that I hadn't taken the lip of the hood into consideration when I ordered it. So although it was perfectly cut to size for the tank glass, it wasn't perfectly cut to size for the actual tank itself. The foundation of the old black gravel is also what I nested the piping into, and you can see that here. Now the rocks are a mixture of inert millennium stone and some limestone in order to raise the pH in this aquarium. Not everyone will agree with this method for raising pH, but I've done a lot of research and kept a journal of my natural water parameters here in South Wales. I have really soft water, and I intend to do fortnightly 25% water changes. I don't want the cost and faff of adding water treatments or using RO water as a base, and I believe that a small amount of limestone in the tank itself should be sufficient to get the parameters up to something that is consistently suitable for Malawi Cichlids. I mix the rock around so they look quite randomly placed, but I've also mostly used millennium stone as the base, and the limestone is the most prominent rock in the foreground and the top of the cluster. I really like the contrast between the rocks and the different textures that are layered on top of one another. I appreciate this is perhaps not the most natural way to build a rockscape, but I think the effect is really cool. Once I had the base stones in place, I started to build up in front and behind them with the black sand. This is the same sand I used in the left-hand apistogramma tank in the basement. It's a Unipac Limpopo sand, and it's a small specks of white in it, which I think offsets really nicely and makes the contrast with the rocks less stark. So here you have the first glimpse at the look I'm going for, with the main stack of rocks on the left and a smaller stack offsetting it on the right. You can also see how great the background is going to look. Now I'm just filling it back up with water and putting the water treatments in. I use Seachem products for all of this stuff, so that's Seachem Prime and Seachem Stability. Now I don't have a mixer tap attachment for my hose, so this water is really cold. To bring it up to temperature, I'm adding hot water from the tap at the same time and checking the temperature with a blue meat thermometer that you can see on top of the tank. Obviously there's no fish in here at the moment and the tank heater is off. Neither withstand the rapid adjustments in temperature. So once I'd made a few final adjustments to the scape and the temperature was back to 25 degrees, it was time to add the fish back in. As you can see, they settled in pretty quickly and weren't hiding away or anything, which was really nice to see. Once they were safely back in and I'd had the tank off for a few hours, I went back and made some final adjustments and scrubbed away any air bubbles with my trusty toothbrush cable tied to tweezers. Who needs fancy tools when you can invent contraptions yourself? Way more fun. The next day I made some finishing touches by adding some Anubias into the gaps in the rocks. I think it offsets everything quite nicely, adds a little bit of green to the aquarium, but ultimately still lets the scape be all about the rocks. And here you go, the finished article. I'm sure you'll agree it looks pretty awesome.